afternoon, and welcome to our Directors Panel discussion marking the 40th anniversary celebration of the Center for Public History. I'm Dr. Nancy Beck Young, John and Rebecca Morse Professor of History and Director of the Center for Public History at the University of Houston, and I'm delighted that you've chosen to spend part of your day with us. This conversation draws on the wisdom of the people who have been director of CPH and held leadership positions in CPH, one who served as associate director and the contributions of the founding editor of the Houston History magazine. As you will learn in the next couple of hours, CPH started with lots of chutzpah and ambition for a different way of engaging students with historical scholarship and apart from the traditional research monograph. Our founding coincided with the advent of public history as an academic pursuit and a mode of training for students who do not want to go into the professorate, but do want meaningful, remunerative careers in history. We have worked to stay current with the best practices in the field, all the while diversifying our student population and our modes of inquiry. I'd like to now introduce our distinguished panelists, and I'll start with Professor Martin V. Melosi, who is on the panel. Dr. Melosi is Cullen Professor Emeritus and founding director of the Center for Public History at UH. He received multiple distinguished research and service awards from the American Society for Environmental History and the Urban History Association. He also received the Esther Farfel Award from the University of Houston, which is the highest award given to UH faculty. Melosi is the author or editor of 23 books and more than 100 articles and book chapters, and who knows, there could be another 5 books since I wrote this, including 2 recent award winners, Fresh Kills, Consuming and Discarding in New York City, and Water in North American Environmental History. Dr. Kathleen Brosnan is Travis Chair of Modern American History at University of Oklahoma and past president of the American Society for Environmental History. Brosnan has published 7 books. Her most recent books include 2 edited collections, one about mapping nature and the other about the Great Plains. In her years as associate director of the UH Center for Public History, Dr. Brosnan directed a website about black doctors in Houston, co-edited and co-wrote a film about UH during World War II, and edited an environmental history encyclopedia. Dr. Monica Perales is Associate Vice Provost of the University of Texas San Antonio Institute of Texan Cultures, a historian of Texas and the U.S.-Mexico borderlands. Her book, Smelter Town, received a book prize from the Urban History Association. Prior to joining UTSA, Monica was Associate Professor of History and Director of the UH Center for Public History. In this capacity, she received multiple external grants, including awards from the Summerlee Foundation, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. Dr. Debbie Harwell served as editor of Houston History magazine since 2009. After completing her PhD at UH in 2012, she began teaching Houston history and public history methods classes, in which her students conduct oral histories, write articles for the magazine, and complete other creative work. Over 130 student articles have been published in the magazine as of spring 2024. Her book, Wednesdays in Mississippi, won the 2015 Julia Cherry Spruill Prize for the best book in Southern women's history, and it has since been turned into a play. In addition to talking about her role with the magazine, Debbie will also share recollections about Dr. Joseph Pratt, who worked in CPH for over 3 decades and provided generous support for the center from his chair in the history department. Joe cannot be with us today, so Debbie will speak for him. Dr. Mark Goldberg is Associate Professor of History at University of Houston, and he served as interim director of CPH last academic year, 2023 through 2024. His research focuses on U.S. Latinx history, immigration, and borders. His book, Conquering Sickness, examines the role of health and healing in imperial expansion and nation building in the Texas-Mexico border region. He is currently working on a book project about the history of Latinx Jewish migration, and he has organized a public history project related to this research titled Lahora, Jewish Latinos and Explorations in History and Identity. And as soon as I can sit down, we'll start the panel discussion. Okay. Well, I probably don't need the microphone, but I'll use it. A blessing or a curse was loud pipes. So I'm going to ask the first question of Dr. Melosi. How did public history come to the University of Houston?
I want to thank everybody for this wonderful event. It's almost hard to believe it's been 40 years. Back in 1984, when I arrived here, I finally got a sense of how this began. The year before, some members of the department had decided that they really wanted to kind of upgrade the ability of the Department of History to be competitive, not only within the state of Texas, but nationally. And they realized that supporting kind of conventional graduate program would not be sufficient. There was a lot of competition, and the University of Houston was still relatively young. And they began a couple of initiatives prior to my arrival. One was called the Humanities and the Professions, which resulted in 2 endowed professorships, a library endowment, and a technical lecture series. And when I got here, that was not completed yet. I was involved in some of the grant writing. It resulted in a $3 million grant, a very large one, with support from NEH. And that was a way to kind of connect history with the professions. They had wanted a chair in medical history, but at that time we did not have a medical school, so NEH was not going to support it. But nonetheless, the idea was to reach out beyond history to demonstrate the value of history in connection with the professions. The other one was beginning an idea for a public history program. They created a fairly rudimentary curriculum for a master's degree, and that's about it. So when I came down for my interview, I was teaching at Texas A&M at the time. I was there for about 8 years, and my friend and colleague, Joe Pratt, said, "You should go down there and check it out." He said, he was down here doing consulting work over the years. He said, "I think you'll really like it. It's a good program." I knew nothing about the program or the university, and Joe was very instrumental, and as many of you know, he became a colleague here at U of H and was one of the reasons why this program was successful, one of the main reasons why it was successful. So anyhow, there was an idea, and that's what it amounted to. When I came down to interview in March of 1984, a lot of promises were made from the dean's office. Most used to say were never fulfilled. Nothing new. And as a kind of a sidebar, if you look at the development of public history programs around the country in those years, and there were very few that were engaged, but there were many that were kind of online. The pattern was very, very similar in the sense that they would bring in a fledgling non-tenured assistant professor with a grandiose plan to run a program and then give them no resources, and then tell them they also had to make tenure. The difference here was that I was a tenured full professor at 37 years old, young and foolish and inexperienced in things. And so at the behest of the department, I was invited to apply for the job, and I didn't know what public history was. I had really no idea what that meant. But what the department was looking for was an urban historian. My predecessor, David Hammock, taught urban history, and then he moved on to Case Western Reserve. And David was starting to think about this, but it really wasn't in his wheelhouse. It was not really something that he was that interested in doing, but he was going to pursue it if he had stayed. And they wanted someone who was entrepreneurial, and I did fit that role. And I kind of understood that what they wanted was the development of a program that would be an academic program, one with a research base, and then a community outreach. And that was it. That's all I knew. I was foolish enough to say yes, largely because the salary was very attractive. And if I was smart, I would have asked for a lot more money, but I didn't. And so I got here in August of '84 and met with the provost, I think, and they said, we need to send you to Austin to the coordinating board of the state to discuss the master's program in public history to get that officially sanctioned. They said, don't worry, you don't have to talk. We're sending the provost with you, and he'll do all the talking. So we got to the meeting, the room was full, and they had all this they had this different business, and the provost turned to me and said, you're on. So I had to make the pitch, and I'm very good at BS, and so I said what I figured I could say, and they did support the program. So when I got back, it was a question of trying to start the building, and again, the directions were not very clear. I had gone to a summer seminar in public history in Arizona that July. July in Arizona is wonderful, as you might suspect. But I learned a lot about managing a program and developing it, and really got a good start. Without that, I just don't think I would have had a ground plan at all. We didn't have staff. I was given $8,000 total. Release time for 1 year with promise of nothing more than that. And I was dumb enough to take the job to begin with, so it's my own fault. And I was just told, you know, in a small little office in the history department, and they said, go to it. And so that's really how it began, and it was a question of learning the community. I knew nothing of Houston. I was a native Californian who went to school in Montana and had recently been in Texas, and didn't know Houston at all. I thought it was a great opportunity to be here. I was an urban historian, loved the idea of being in a city like Houston. So I did venture into the community on a regular basis, spent the first probably 6 months meeting people, as many as I could, to kind of get a sense of what was going on, and started developing the program. It was a very lonely task for that first year and 2 years until Joe showed up as the chair of history and business. And I think that when Joe came, things started picking up a great deal. And he applied resources to the program, broadened the scope of what we were doing. And so I managed the things I was doing, and Joe really kind of expanded it, which eventually resulted in the magazine, the Oral History Project, and the archival program. And that was all Joe's doing, and his staff, eventually including Debbie. So it had a very small start. I was very grateful to the National Council on Public History, which was kind of the overseeing organization nationally, because it was through that connection with those people that had already done what I was trying to do, and some of them were just beginning to do it, where we had a lot of feedback and interaction. And that became very, very important in the development. And that first class we had in 1984 had 4 students, and Debbie Carter was one of them. And we started it was a great group of students, one of the best I'd ever had, even though the numbers were kind of slight. And 2 of the 4 went on to public history jobs. 1 went on to development, and 1 went on to an academic appointment in history of science. But it was a great learning experience for them and for me. And that's how things started, and many of the years since then have been a blur, to tell you the truth.
Thank you, Marty. I think I'm going to go to Monica next. I know that when you stepped into the role to become a director after Marty stepped down, you spent quite a bit of time going through and studying what had been and where to go next. So I suspect you have spent also a fair amount of time thinking about the challenges that CPH has faced. And so I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Yeah, challenges. I think one of the biggest challenges that we faced at that time was, you know, Marty and Joe had created CPH and had supported it in so many important ways, not only through the financial support of, endowed chairs and the ability to provide resources for students and to create projects, but also in their very, sort of large presence in their respective areas of research. So coming in, I had 2 sets of very big shoes to fill. We didn't have the same kind of resources, just in terms of the funding, although Marty was really wonderful just in terms of explaining how to be creative, right? And I think that entrepreneurial spirit that Marty and Joe brought to creating the infrastructure of CPH is something that has continued, right? You kind of figure out and find a way, through the system. I think that one of the challenges that we encountered was, how do we do what we're going to do without, these 2 really big, sort of names and presence, not only in their disciplines, but in the university, right? They had years of relationships, within University of Houston, and, I think for me, one of the most important things to do was to think about what we did and what we did well, right? And to kind of have a laser focus on what the best parts of CPH were. And I think it was creating opportunities for students, through the curriculum, but through internships and through leveraging relationships in the community to provide students a unique, hands-on experience to learn what it is to do public history. Certainly we had the structure and the curriculum, the classes, we could teach, how to be a public historian, but the best way to learn how to be a public historian is to do public history. And so I think that was, one of the most important, and I think the first things that we had to do. I think the other thing that I learned from Marty and Joe is finding the right team to get you there. And the fact that folks here at U of H had been working with Marty and Joe for a long time, and they had cultivated, again, these relationships that we could build upon, that was the easy part, right? Was to find the right people to help us move forward and to think about, okay, what do we want to do now? And maybe in the past, because of the depth of knowledge in environmental history and in urban history, we didn't have that anymore. What are the other areas that we could bring to the table? So, women's history, race and ethnicity, food history, all these other areas that we could also plug into CPH. So that's kind of where I would start.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Monica.
Could I?
Yeah, Kathy, please.
Thanks, Nancy. Thanks for the invitation to be here. Thanks for using my photo that's at least 15 years old. Because I don't believe I aged, so that's great. When I came here, 2002 or 2003, 4, I'm not sure which year it is, I wasn't hired specifically to work in public history, but I had done public history work before I came here. And I do work in the same fields as Marty and Joe. So I gradually kind of moved into public history, but I think one of the greatest gifts that Marty, in particular, Joe too, but Marty in particular gave us when we became involved with public history here was his trust. That he trusted us to pursue our interest, that he had confidence we would do well, that he wasn't looking for us to mimic what he had done, but he wanted us to bring our own voices to it, and he had enough confidence in what he had done that he knew that would only strengthen the center over time. And I'll tell you, the gift of trust is one of the most special things you could ever acquire.
I would say that, yeah, that investment, right? If you had an idea for how to expand opportunities to teach students in public history or to create a project that had public-facing dimensions, that investment in the time and the effort and the advice, sometimes some resources, which doesn't hurt, to kind of nurture that and to build on it. And it only kind of amplified what we were able to do. So I would agree with that.
Those are great points. I'm going to take this. Oh,
Go.
I'm sorry.
I just wanted to add a comment on trust for Joe, since you mentioned about Marty. When I came to the magazine as a grad student. First of all, for those of you who don't know me, I came to grad school way later in life. So Joe and I were just a couple of years difference in age. So I think he had me join the staff because I was a native Houstonian, and we remembered all the same places and all the same people and that kind of stuff. But when Joe hired me, and I, show up at the magazine to get started, and he goes, "Oh, and by the way, I just accepted the position as interim dean, so have at it." And it was like, well, wait a minute, you just threw me in the deep end. I don't know how to swim yet. But he essentially told me, "You'll figure it out." So I did.
So Debbie, you anticipated part of what I was going to ask you to do, but I'd like for you to say more about our colleague Joe Pratt. So talk about Joe's spirit and Joe's vision of public history and the joys of working with Joe.
Well, I worked with Joe for, let's see, seven years directly, and every day was a pure joy, not only because we love to talk about the Astros, but we also had a lot of fun putting together magazines, and we had a lot of the same vision about the sorts of things that were important for telling community history, and especially telling community history of those people who are usually left out of the narrative. And one of the things that he liked to do was bring in a lot of different voices. And early on, he had me, he would meet with us about the magazine, and we were doing a thing on the Astros and the Astrodome, and he'd just sort of throw in these little hints. Larry McMurtry wrote something on the Astrodome. Why don't you see if we can get it? And I'm like, yeah, okay. And I didn't really think he was serious, and he would tell me again. And finally, I realized I'm supposed to contact Larry McMurtry and get this essay. And so I called his bookshop in Archer City, and they said, "Oh, we don't know, we can't do that. We don't know how to even get a hold of him right now." And 20 minutes later, my phone rings, and it's Larry McMurtry. And I'm like doing this happy dance. Is this Larry McMurtry? And I talked to him about Joe's vision for why he wanted to use this essay, because frankly, I hadn't ever read it. I wasn't familiar with it. And so I just told him what Joe said, and he said, okay. And he said there'll be a nominal fee of $100. That's less than the Chronicle charges for one photograph. And Joe was so excited when I came back to him and said, "We've got this essay, it's going to be $100. And he goes, "I'd have paid $1,000. And so that was sort of how my days operated with Joe. It was going to the dean's office and getting 5 minutes of magazine business done and 45 minutes on how to write a good dissertation, or 10 minutes of magazine business and a half an hour on being a good editor. It was always fun, but it was also always working and also learning and all those different kinds of things. And I would not trade 1 minute ever of all the things that I learned from Joe Pratt over those years. He's an amazing mentor and an amazing friend.
Would anyone else like to share their Joe Pratt memories?
Let me just mention a couple things. Joe and I couldn't be any more different. Our backgrounds, it was amazing that we were friends. But I helped bring him into Texas A&M. I was one of the people that was on the committee. And Joe came in with a higher salary than I had. I helped bring him into the University of Houston. He came in with a higher salary than I Those things didn't seem to matter much, but the one thing that we did have in common, we were very honest with each other. We had a few, he thought there were squabbles. To me, it's talking loud. I mean, I'm an Italian-American. He's a Texas boy. He doesn't understand that. So, but it was that honesty that was the best thing. If we had aspirations, we shared them. But we also shared, if we had differences about things, we shared those too. We were a very good judgment of people we hired. We had a lot of discussions about the people we hired, but we were very good judges of who we hired. And Kathy talked about trust. You have trust when you feel confident in the people that you bring in. And then you let them do their stuff and let them do their thing. And in public history, that's what Joe and I did. He had certain things he wanted to work on and that he brought his resources and his time. And I said, you do that, and I'll do the rest. I often said that with Joe was he proposed and I disposed. He liked me doing the managing. He liked me doing those. We brought the first American Society for Environmental History Conference to Houston, and Joe had proposed that at the environmental meeting, and it was in Evergreen, Washington. Didn't tell me. He just did it, and he said, oh, by the way, they said we're going to have the meeting in Houston. I hope you do a good job with it. And that's the way it went. And that wasn't fair because he did his work as well. But it's that kind of relationship that made a lot of difference. And you have to have that fundamental honesty, which is not a characteristic of academia. People talk around each other too much. And I think one of the things that when you retire, when you reflect on your years, you realize that if people had been more straightforward with each other, privately and in meetings, life would be a lot different. You wouldn't bear these grudges and different difficulties. And we had that, and I think that's one of the reasons why, at least during the time I was associated with the center, that it was joyful because of that kind of relationship.
I was going to just say, Joe wasn't much of a talker. Okay, the truth is I could listen to Joe Pratt stories the rest of my life. He's a great talker. Joe's a great storyteller. And when we did make the movie, I worked with Michelle Riley from the library to work on that movie, and a bunch of our graduate students worked on it too. It was a short 35-minute documentary about UH during the war. And Joe was one of our talking heads. And Michelle had to convince me that no, we could not have the film consist of some images and 25 minutes of Joe talking. But his stories were so good. So anyway, he's a great talker.
Yeah. And I would add that one of the biggest, I think, most important contributions, that Joe brought to CPH, again, sort of thinking about, sort of the twin goals of providing students with opportunities to do public history, was that focus on Houston history, right? The oral history program, right? It was Joe's idea to sort of document the stories of everyday Houstonians from all walks of life, right? And that formed the basis and the core for Houston History magazine, right? And the films, right? That you were talking about, Kathy. And I think that that piece of what we do is also really important when we kind of think about public history. It's how are we elevating the stories of everyday Houstonians, right? That people from, just around the city have contributed to making Houston what it is today. And, that is now a part of the Welcome Wilson Houston History Collaborative, and that work can kind of continue. But it was really that kind of focus in the storytelling. Like, he loved to tell stories and he loved to listen to them, right? And when I got here, he had me teach the oral history class. And I said, Joe, I don't know how to teach oral history. I don't know what you're talking about. He's like, of course you do. This is your research. You do it. And so, I think that he really put value in that, the stories that people had to share as well.
If I can, I'll throw in something else that I noticed about Joe maybe 15 minutes after I arrived here, and that was his generosity with junior faculty. I came in as a full professor, but I watched with great admiration as to how he would out of his chair, provide travel grant money for junior faculty who needed to get one more research trip in to nail down the work on their manuscript before they submitted to a publisher. I also noticed how he would buy a box of books because publishers are pretty stingy with how many free books that they will give, and he would buy a box of books for junior faculty when they published that first book. And he always made a point in meetings to make sure that junior faculty's voices were heard and respected in the department, even as the department could sometimes be an, I don't know, elbows out kind of place. Joe was an encouraging soul for those who can have the least amount of power in faculty governance, and was a welcoming person for people to come into the work of the center. So I think that was important to be said, and I apologize for adding substance. Okay, Kathy, I think I have a question for you that comes naturally now. You came in here when public history was the Marty and Joe show. If you can talk about what it was like, and I say that with great love and affection for Marty and Joe, if you can say what it was like to join that team.
Sure, thank you. It was fantastic. We worked together, I don't know how many grad committees we were on together, a lot. And we worked together. I mean, one of the more interesting things we did, the three of us worked together to get a grant from the National Science Foundation. Not something a lot of historians are capable of getting, just by the nature of the work we were doing in environmental and energy history. And by the way, that was fun too. When we were deciding how to dedicate the book, we debated different things. And I finally said, well, you guys just had your first grandchildren. Maybe we should dedicate it to them. And Joe said, that's not fair. Maybe we should include your dog. And that's what we did. And I joked to Marty later on that I was a little bothered that Jake, my dog, was listed last. And Marty said, well, my wife was a little upset that the dog was included. So, it goes both ways. But I think it's part of what Monica and I were talking about earlier. It was more that there was this level of trust. In fact, I think the other thing I would say is that Marty and Joe, at the point I got here, had been so successful in what they had brought in that what we actually required was a little bit of organization structure, because now we had so many different projects going on. So we began to work on things that every organization should do, creating a strategic plan, having regular meetings. There was a certain point, I'm going to say around 2008, that area, where we were employing as many as 13 or 15 graduate students in a given semester on different projects. And I think, I forget now who said it, was Monica probably. That is incredibly important, probably even more important today than it was then, because academic positions are very difficult to come by. And I know at Oklahoma, most of our, not most, but a very good chunk of our students are pursuing non-academic jobs, or jobs outside the academy, I should say, in public history. And so that kind of experience, that notion of using the classroom as a way to integrate yourself into the community, and then giving students the opportunity to gain that experience, was just a terrific model.
Let me add that. I think it was really important, and over the long span, you kind of forget these things, but Kathy really reined us in. Joe and I there was a period during that time, not only were we involved in public history, but Joe was department chair and I was graduate director. So I was responsible for my program. I was responsible for all the graduate students. Joe just gave it to me and said, you take care of the graduate students and I'll do the rest. That's fine. And to me, those were the greatest days that I was here. We really felt we accomplished a great deal. But we also were kind of helter-skelter. I was the kind of person that kept everything in my head. I didn't necessarily write it down. I kind of knew what we were doing. And Kathy really brought some structure, real structure. We had some documents and some programs, I think, that were honed and focused because we had a third partner that did that kind of thing that we were less prone to do for whatever reason, either because we were just scattered or that, we just were moving on to something new. So sometimes you can add by subtraction, but you can also add by addition. And that was a case where, we had more voices. And I have to say that in general, that the people that we hired a number of different staff people. And some of them were extraordinarily important to the program. And some were not. But the ones that stayed, Christine Womack was one, Wes, the other. If you don't build things as a team, you don't build anything at all. And you never can think about it as being the singular force. If you get to that point, it's just not going to work unless you decide you're going to take on all the work yourself, and that's ridiculous. So I think the kind of three-headed monster that we were was also dependent upon having the kind of staff support. We didn't have a lot of staff. It was not like a department or anything, but what we did have was essential. And it works in cases where you don't have to tell people what to do. When people know what they need to do and know that they can contribute, they have a voice, they have a right to critique and to explain and participate, then it works. And so we're very lucky. That's why I always liked being part of the center, especially when it grew. When I was by myself, it was kind of frightening. But as soon as that ended and it was more of a team, then it's when you begin to feel the opportunities, the optimism for the future.
Okay, I'm going to take us in a different direction, and Mark, I'm going to start with you on this one, and anybody who wants to jump in later can. What has been your favorite public history project to work on?
That's hard to say. So I guess there are two that stand out for me. One is now, and one is we finished it recently. So the Harvey project. So Hurricane Harvey happened in August 2017. I remember just a few weeks later we had a meeting, and Monica was telling us that people are already calling about what's the Center for Public History going to do, because we had this tradition in oral history and environmental history. And then in spring of 2018, I guess Monica did to me what Joe did to her, which was say, Mark, teach oral history. You're doing oral history now. You've never taught it, but you can teach it. So in spring of 2018, I taught oral history and connected it with the Harvey project. But that was the beginning of a multi-year participation in this project that, the city is still honestly dealing with Harvey. So in a way, it's still unfolding. And we handed our materials, like the final set, to the archive?
In the December.
Yeah, not long ago. So that's one. And then I'm now working on another oral history project, the Algorithms Project with Julie Coe. And I found myself in this project with electrical engineers and a historian of technology. And here I am, an oral historian in ethnic studies. I mean, I know a little bit about what's going on. But that's been the coolest part about it, right? One cool thing I think about public history are the unpredictable ways in which this field and your participation in it develops. So, I think what's important about the project and why I like to be a part of it is, we create these artificial boundaries between what STEM does and what humanities does, but those boundaries are artificial, and we're really showing that with this project. But it's pushing me in a way that I never, again, I'm learning things that I never knew existed. I'm going to pass it in a moment, but I do want to point out that I think this highlights a really important thing about CPH, which we also saw in the last panel, which is the variety of projects that exist within the center, right? And I only named two, but there's so many, there's such a wide variety of cool things that are happening in the center.
Surely somebody else has a favorite public history project.
I have about, I don't know, 50 or 100 favorite public history projects. The way Joe kind of envisioned this, as Monica said, was the oral history and a place to store it in the archives and a place to disseminate that information in the magazine all in one spot is kind of how we came to this. And I suppose in a way that's also how my trajectory on favorite projects worked, which was first doing oral histories. The first oral histories I did were for a class that I took in 2009 with the Yates class of 1958, and I'm still friends with some of those people. In fact, there's one of those women that she sends me inspirational little text messages almost every single day, and I respond because we really became good friends. And then to know that, in fact, I'd forgotten about this. The other day, she sent me a message and said, look what this friend of mine found. And I went to the link, and it was her oral history in our archives and special collections. And she knew that, but she had forgotten that it was there, and it really made her day. So that, in turn, made my day. But the other thing that's really a favorite of mine, no surprise, is the magazine. And people ask me, what's your favorite magazine? Well, it's usually the one that just came out, whichever one that might be.
It's off the table.
So, that's just how it is. Certainly, I have ones that have been more challenging than others, but they've all been very special. But another thing that makes it really special is how it impacts our students. You know, when they go into an oral history, just like we're impacted, or any of you who do oral history are impacted by that experience, so are the students, and it changes them. When they get their article published in the magazine, and I get to hand them that print copy and see their faces light up like nothing you've ever seen, that is a really special moment. And that is one of my favorite things about the public history that we do here.
I have something that's a little different, and I know you always forget, Maria Corsi, too, is one of our staff people, extraordinarily helpful. I didn't want to leave anybody out. One thing I really enjoyed, and it was, we brought in a number of postdocs for a number of years. We had the good fortune of bringing in some postdocs that were from other universities in the States. Joe was helpful on some of those. Rick Mazzell, who became a colleague, originally been with us as a postdoc. Jilly Cohn had worked with us, and I'm not sure that was the official title of her participation, but we had a large number of students from China and from Brazil and from Mexico and from Belgium. And they obviously were with us to develop their own projects and do their own work, but the enriching feature of having kind of an international presence to me was always extraordinarily important. I ended up going to China several occasions because or with some of these students and talking about public history there, which was an interesting experience in itself. But just the rounding out of our group, it was really enjoyable. And circumstances largely accounted for it because after COVID, it was very difficult to see those programs sustain themselves, certainly with China for geopolitical reasons as much as for health reasons. We couldn't continue, but the steady flow of new people coming in was invigorating in a lot of ways. And it was not so easily directed toward any project, but it was really kind of directed toward the power of the community, which was made possible. CPH, there's a lot less hoops to go through, a lot less red tape. And not that the department would have not tried to do some of these things, but it was more difficult. And so to me, that was always something that the number of the pictures that we've seen on the slides, there's some of those those people that were with us, and that was just, to me, very, very satisfying experience.
So my favorite project, and it's like picking your favorite child, but my favorite project was working on the history of African American physicians in Houston. And like a number of our projects, it actually began in the classroom. One of the models Marty developed was that in the public history research seminar, we go out and get clients, and the students will work with people in the community. It's a practice I continue when I teach public history in Oklahoma. And that community element is so essential to being a part of the world in which you're living, not separated in the academy. And that project came to us through the Houston Medical Forum, which was an organization of black doctors in Houston. And their initial idea was to create an exhibit that would travel from high school to high school. We suggested there's this thing called the internet that might allow us to do that without all the challenges of moving an exhibit. But it started in the classroom, developed over time. We got some outside grant money, the Houston Medical Forum. We signed a contract with them for a substantial amount. Our colleague Gerald Horn helped us one semester. Joe helped. We were able to do oral histories using the Oral History Project. We ultimately conducted some 30 oral histories. We got grants from Humanities Texas to develop lesson plans. And because it could work for both U.S. history and for Texas history and for African American history, there was a certain point, of course the website's out of date now, but there was a certain point where it was being used by more than 300 schools across Texas. And so it just, and the students did most of the work. I oversaw it, but the students did the work. And it just really, I was just so proud of what they did because I knew we had an impact beyond. And it told a story that people don't always know about in the African American community. So I thought that was really just such a wonderful opportunity. I was so grateful to have it.
We did have actually one of our students who's here who helped to update the Black Doctors project. Shine Trabuco. Again, in the spirit of sort of leveraging resources to support students to do that work, to kind of update that and archive it and make it accessible again. I think. So there are two projects. I love all of the ones that are mentioned here. I think there's two that really stand out for me. One was the Gulf Coast Food Project. It allowed me to work with some really great colleagues, Todd Romero and Mark, and others to kind of, not just in the history department, right? We had Temple Northup, who was a professor in communications, and Stella Gregorian in sociology, and it allowed us to kind of explore history, Houston history, public history through food, because that's just really awesome kind of research to do. And it allowed us to, hold a conference that was, which hurricane was it that threw us off? We were supposed to have it. We had, I can't remember. We were supposed to have a conference. We had to keep stretching it because weather. And so that was really a wonderful kind of project that we had. I think the other one that I have a very kind of soft spot in my heart for is the 100 Years of Stories project. And I think that, because that was one that we were very lucky and fortunate to have funded by a donor who had an interest in showcasing the importance and the impact of the University of Houston over its almost century. It allowed us to connect internally with folks who are interested in recognizing this very big anniversary that's coming up. It allowed me to work really closely with Debbie to identify how we were going to tell this story. We were able to partner with Houston Public Media that created these wonderful radio and video spots that aired that was based on student research. It allowed us to work with really great students. Caitlin was a student working on that. I think Jovan, you were also a part of that. We created an exhibit in the library. And so it was, I think, all of the best things about public history, everything that we've talked about was kind of hit in that in that project, right? We were able to secure the external funding. We were able to reach wider audiences. We were able to collaborate across the university. Several magazine issues dedicated to work that was done by students on that project. So to me, that was kind of like the greatest hits of public history and CPH work was in 100 Years of Stories.
And we had an opportunity to learn a lot about exhibits.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone, for that trip down memory lane of past CPH projects. I have a different sort of question, and I don't necessarily have anybody in particular in mind to deal with it, so I'll let you pick who goes first and who does and doesn't go on this one. How has doing public history changed, if at all, the way you think about whatever it is we call not public history? I've heard academic history. The students in my readings in public history class this semester have called it nerd history, and that's what we're running with this semester. So whatever you would call that, how has being a public historian changed the way you think about that other kind of history?
Well, I promised myself I wouldn't talk much. That's like asking the sea not to rise after a hurricane.
We want you to talk, Marty.
When I was offered this job, the one thing that stood in the way, especially I really wanted to get a new job. Living in a small town in East Texas just didn't suit me very well, and I was ready to move, and I got the job, I had it in hand, and I thought, well, automatically I would just take it. But I was really afraid that an academic career that I was building, that was growing and I was enjoying, was going to be cut short by the demands of putting together a center, which would be putting administrative time ahead of everything else. And so I really wasn't sure I wanted to do that. And I came to Houston, and people would say, "Oh yeah, you're the new public historian." I said, "No, I'm not. I'm an environmental historian," and I would be insulted by it, and I really meant it. Little by little, first I realized that the gap between what my interests were and the larger community that can absorb public history was non-existent. Maybe I had to learn how to talk to people a little differently, and not in academic jargon, but to communicate and listen more. But I started realizing that the community was not limited and shouldn't be limited to a few historians that might read your books. And the more I did it, and I felt as a teacher of public history, I had to experience aspects of the field that I didn't know anything about. So having done some consulting work with on archives in various places, getting involved in litigation work, which I did a lot of, working with archivists in different capacities. All these experiences made me not only be able to teach the subjects more effectively, but to appreciate the ways in which history had these wonderful outlets. And I saw the power of history, and that's where I saw the power of history, was being able to talk as an historian to all manner of people, city council members. Oftentimes I get a phone call from somebody in the city, and they said they want to talk to me. Mostly they want to talk about finding a job after they got off of city council, but they would come to you with a problem, and they would say, "We have this particular problem, you have some experience with it, what do you think?" And again, to realize that history has that power, that it can be a complementary source of information. It's not the only source, but it's a complementary source. To me, is valuable. And that's all I needed to know to realize that public history was important.
I want to play off something Marty said about speaking to the public, speaking to different audiences. And in some ways, I think that requirement for those of us who have done public history, that ability to speak to different audiences, actually makes public history more challenging than what we think of as traditional academic history. When I write something in what we call my field, I can assume there's a certain commonality of understanding, a knowledge about the literature, a knowledge about the facts. I could never bring those assumptions into working on public history projects. It requires me to really dissect what I do and our ability to talk to those different audiences. But I think perhaps the most important thing I've learned from working with community members on these different projects, and that I think does begin to shape how I write in my academic career, we'll continue with the false dichotomy, is the notion of shared authority. If you're a public historian working with the community, one of the things you have to accept is shared authority. You can't go into projects thinking, I'm the expert, let me tell you this. You have to be willing to recognize that other people are bringing experiences and their own forms of expertise. And if you really think about that shared authority when I'm working on my own projects, then I have to work harder to give voice to the people who have been left out of narratives, to share whatever I know, to let them share their thoughts through my work. And so I think it's the concept of shared authority that I carry over to all of my scholarship as a way to be more inclusive.
Yeah, I want to add to that in a couple of ways. So we're talking about accessibility, and I think about it in two ways that's relevant here. So one, making the narratives, these complicated, intensely researched narratives accessible to the public is part of this, and that's part of shared authority too. And I'll tell you, I gave a lecture 2 weeks ago in town, and part of it was, so much of my research is based in Miami, but I thought there would be a Houston component. So I delivered the Houston part of this research, and it's honestly, it's like part of my family history here. And I was just so nervous. And my parents were the subjects and the audience members. And I was just so nervous about telling their story to them in the way that I researched it. And it got better once I started going, but I felt this different kind of nervousness and overwhelmingness that I think is part of shared authority. But the other way that this how public and non-public is shaping each other for me is the way, the issue of accessibility around archives. So I'm researching the history of Jewish Latin American immigrants, which shouldn't surprise you that there isn't an archive of Jewish Latin American immigrants in the United States, okay? If it wasn't for one Cuban community member in Miami who did keep papers, perhaps this project would not be possible. So I knew immediately that oral history was going to be a part of this. And I'm a trained early Americanist, kind of like Todd Romero said in the last panel. I found myself in public history, not fully accidentally, but largely. And so I had to trained in oral history, and so part of what drove this research for me was that these stories aren't in an archive. And then, once I learned about what oral history, I remember studying oral history as a graduate student, but really practicing it, recognizing the important archival component of oral history. And so early on, this project was a two-pronged thing, a traditional academic research project, but an archive building project at the same time. And the way that immigrant oral histories have been archived, I learned from teaching and then studying oral history, was they're housed in university archives. And what's great about the digital age is that you can, either go to the archive to listen to the oral history, or nowadays you can access many of them online. And so I started conducting these oral histories, and they're sitting on my hard drive, and then I'm teaching immigration history and using oral history to teach. And I'm thinking, is the university archive even the right home for these interviews? How accessible are these interviews, even digitized in a university archives website? Would my parents, for example, be able to navigate this process to hear these stories? And I don't know. I mean, I think some community members would and some wouldn't. And one thing I learned from Arte Público, they were here. They were here before. I don't know if they're here now. But they're so great at this accessibility question, and like their philosophy is that whatever digital projects they do should be able to be pulled up on a smartphone. Okay? And it's about communities, and many times, and this applies to my work, who don't see their stories in mainstream narratives of American history represented, making those stories accessible to them. And so I studied about archival silences in graduate school and thought about it, but it was really doing public history that made me rethink it.
I want to add sort of a side note to those things, that not only is it about telling the stories and the shared authority and seeing the value of those things, it's helping our students see that shared authority and the value in lived experiences. And so that, because we have a lot of first-gen college students here. So for them to understand that their story is important, their parents' story is important, their grandparents' story is important, and that it has value because it comes from the community, I think is one of the most critical things that we do in many ways. And so I didn't know what public history was when I came to the University of Houston. I had already completed a master's program at the University of Memphis where I'd taken history courses, but I'd never heard that term until I came here and interviewed with Joe. And boy, once I learned about it, I thought this was the greatest thing I'd ever heard of. And it has been. I'd rather do public history than anything else. No offense to my academic colleagues. But I think that one of the reasons it's so important is that it tells community members that we are recognizing their value, and it tells our students that we are recognizing their value. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, I mean, just to underscore what y'all are saying, I think that it's about that relevance. It's about seeing yourself in history that I think that animates many public historians, right? That there is a beauty and a power in sort of doing a form of history that allows people to see themselves in the story. And I know that this was something that at least I kind of came to in my research, my academic side, if we're again sort of going to keep those boundaries, but and that informed that. But I think doing public history only emphasized and underscored the importance of it. And I know when I taught public history and even in my other classes that were not officially public history classes, the important thing that I felt to get across to students is that history doesn't live only in the books that you're reading or in the articles that you're reading. Right. History lives in our families, it lives in our communities, it lives in our institutions, it lives in the public, it lives out and about, right? And I think that once students understand that often that's the thing that really got them interested in history in the first place. And I remember the first time I taught an undergraduate public history course, I was describing what public history is, and I think that the class filled because it was at a time that really fit a time slot. I was very strategic about when to offer it so that the class would fill, and it did. And I think I would say the majority of the students weren't quite sure what this public history thing was, but when I talked about all of the different ways that public historians can be of service to their communities by sort of keeping these whether they're collecting oral histories or working on archival projects or, connecting with communities. By the end of that first class, people were like, that is what I want to do. I've always been interested in history, and that's what I liked. I didn't like doing, memorizing things and taking tests and doing this other thing, but that's what I like. And I think that that's the relevance, that is the hook, that's the connector, that's what unites us as people and parts of society, right? That's what makes us human, so.
Just real quick, I want to follow up what Monica said, because I think we're at a time in the world where at some universities, the humanities are under attack. We are seeing history departments losing numbers of majors. And I think not only should people in academic history have greater respect for public history, I think they should embrace it as the savior in this case. I'm thinking of just even teaching the big US survey course. I've given my students an assignment at times. Interview someone in your family about their participation in history. And back when I was at Tennessee, this kid said, "Oh, we just own a furniture store." Well, turned out they owned a furniture store which provided all the furniture when Oak Ridge National Laboratories was created in the middle of World War II. And so his grandfather knew this whole history about this secret city that was built in the hills of Tennessee. It was a pretty good story. But if we can find ways to give our undergraduates a sense of ownership, that they are part of the larger narrative, and I know that's challenging if you're doing a class on ancient Greece, but particularly for those who are Americanist, if you can figure out a way to have those students become more invested through their own lived experiences and their families' experiences, I think we can find ways to give a rebirth to history, to the humanities generally.
Something, I think from a personal point of view, getting involved in public history kind of gave me the confidence to think in new ways about my own work. I'm the kind of person, I get up every morning and I write. I'm doing academic stuff. It's because to me, it's like breathing. It's got to be done. But when I retired, I said, I don't want to just do that. And so two things in particular I'm doing now. I'm the producer of a full-length documentary that we're in the process of developing, which has been a tremendous learning experience working with filmmakers and thinking about talking in a different language about things that I've talked about in academic books. It's just been enlightening. The other thing is I finished a book in June about a conversation between my father and I about his years in Italy. He was a seminarian in fascist Italy for 4 years. And I had these diaries on my shelf for 30 years. And I had other things of his. And I finally decided to put it on paper. And the book came out in June. And I've given talks about it. I gave it to the family. All the members of the family have a copy. And what I got from them, those that have read it, and what I've gotten from people that have heard the talk is the same thing. It made them very introspective about their own life. I mean, they thought it was interesting what my father went through. That's fine. It's very personal. I try to make it connect him to the larger world at that time. But the biggest impact on me is seeing what this has done to people thinking about their own lives and about their own families. And that's the kind of thing that public history is capable of doing, in the same way that the documentary is capable of reaching a larger number of people than my own colleagues. And that gives me, a great deal of comfort knowing that this is the kind of stuff that, as public historians, we can do. It's very important.
Thank you. I'm going to combine two questions into one and see what happens with that.
Yes.
I have faith. The first part of the question is, what do you see as missed opportunities in the past 40 years of our Center for Public History's existence? What are some things that you wished had happened differently? And the flip side to that, the B side, if you're old enough to remember when there was a B side, and if you're not, talk to us after. What is your ambition for the Center for Public History? As I've been joking, kind of in the joking, not joking sort of way with Dr. Jackson over the past week as we've been finalizing this, I've said, we have to do this again in 10 years when we turn 50, and we'll be 100 in 60 years. So what is your ambition for CPH when it hits its 50th anniversary? And what is your ambition for CPH when it becomes 100?
I don't care.
Should we share that answer with the crowd?
They heard it.
Oh.
Okay, I think I got something. So, I think in 10 years, sort of something that was mentioned in the panel with the alums is, and I think it was Sandra that mentioned it, right? The importance of valuing student work through paid internships. And I think in 10 years, a great goal is to have a structured paid internship program for students in public history and the public humanities, right? Mm-hmm. And I think sort of a sort of additional piece of this is finding ways to kind of think about sort of extending CPH in public history to continue to grow to be that hub that brings humanists together from different disciplines to work with and for the community.
I think one of the biggest challenges is something that Mark alluded to. I think that one of the biggest challenges is keeping up to date with the technology and the different potential ways in which material can be presented, the different ways it can be archived. The technology is changing so rapidly, and this is probably one way in which we can really benefit from that student input, because I know they're better at it than I am. But I think the biggest challenge is going to be keeping up with the technology and rethinking the ways in which we tell the stories.
I think a missed opportunity is not so much an opportunity that we missed at the Center for Public History as much as it is that our institutions are missing an opportunity by not putting value on the humanities in the same way that they put value on STEM. There's a mentoring award here at the university for undergraduate mentoring, and I counted up the other day, it's been presented 39 times, and 3 times it's gone to people in the humanities. And I think that says something about how our work and the value of our work needs to be better elevated, and that's not just history, that's across the board. And in terms of things that I'd like to see in 10 years, I probably will make that one. Not sure what'll happen, beyond that. And by the way, I should note, I'm the only person who's worked for pretty much everybody on this panel directly, except for Kathy, and that was more indirectly when I was a grad student. But I've worked, under all these other folks.
With,
okay, whatever. And anyway, I digress. Some of the things that I would like to see us have is, and this gets to paid student internships, is to have a really solid source of funding that continues to pay for that on a continuous basis. Whether that means we need somebody to name the center or whatever that means, however we accomplish that, I think that's what we should do. And that would include being able to go back to when we had a graduate student all the time as an oral history director. Because boy, we cranked out oral histories and got them to the archives back in those days, better than we do today with nobody in that position. And the other thing I think that would be really cool for us to do, because the Houston History Magazine is the only publication in the city or the region that is dedicated to telling our regional history, is for us to put together some sort of an edited volume based on our past articles to do a comprehensive history of the city of Houston. There has not been a comprehensive history on Houston published since 1981, which is pretty hard to believe for the fourth largest city in the country. A lot of topical books have been released, but not some sort of overarching history. So I think that would be an interesting project for us to set our sights on in the future.
Yeah, on missed opportunities, following what Debbie said, I do think there's been a missed opportunity with the administration of this university. If I'm not mistaken, I don't see anybody here from the upper administration. And when I was director for 33 years, that was something that was chronic. I was always told that if you wanted to build at U of H, you had to build from the bottom up, and unfortunately that's true. For administrations that talk so much about community outreach, I see very little attention to groups that have been doing it for 40 years. And it's on them to come to us. I'm not talking about with dollars, I'm just talking about support. And it was one of the frustrations of having to put this together. Never among my colleagues and never among the students. It was always among those that had the opportunity and the power to do something about it who decided that it wasn't worth their time. And if I had any other regrets, it was in my own personal experience, I try to balance my ongoing academic career with running a center, and I always felt guilty. I'd never devoted enough time to the center. And because of the monumental opportunities that exist out there, it's a logical frustration because there's so much that you can do. In many cases, a lot of projects are going to fail, or a lot of projects never make it the light of day. You can't stop looking for them. You have to continue to look for them, continue to try. Things will get close, and then they'll fade away. So you don't have time to afford to have regrets. You just don't if you're going to do this kind of work. And looking toward the future, I keep on remembering a conversation I had with Monica when I asked her to become director, and she said, and much to her credit, she was very mature about this and didn't say yes right away or no. But she, essentially about putting one's own imprint on the program. She was kind of concerned that she had to kind of follow a path that we had set, and an imprint that we had put on, which was based upon largely on our own interests. And my answer was no. I said, it has to be yours. And what I wish for the program, and I wish this for Nancy, and I wish it for anybody that follows, that they do that. There's no way to be passionate about what we do unless you have an investment in it. And there's a lot of things that we can do, that we should do with our expertise and our investment in time. So that's what I wish for. I mean, for it to exist this long, to me, has been a tremendous joy. And for Debbie to continue doing what she's doing for as long as she possibly can. I've fought for the magazine in the face of people that said, why? Why we continue doing this? It's a money drain, blah, blah, blah. I said, it's the stalking horse of the program. It's so important, and if anybody carries the torch for public history, it's Debbie. So these are things that are achievable, and that's what I think we should be thinking about.
Anyone else? Okay. Didn't want to say you hadn't had the opportunity. Okay. How do you see, this is a different sort of legacy change over time question. How do you see the field of public history overall having changed in the past 4 decades?
Let me say something very quickly about the field. When I first got involved with the National Council years ago, it was dominated by academic public historians who were running public history programs. And and before that, there was the proverbial chip that we all had in our shoulder that academics didn't see the value of public history at all. And when it finally became apparent that it was important, and again, like I said, the academic historians kind of ran the shop. And that proved to be an inappropriate way to think about the leadership of public history. And I think since that time, if you kind of look at the landscape, that it's no longer the case. The practitioners of public history have been much more active on the national level. I think the field is broadened enough that people sometimes don't even think about the distinction between what people are doing in one venue versus another. I've done a lot of litigation work since the 90s, a lot of it. And when I first started doing it, judges and attorneys would hammer away at me about being an historian. What do you have to contribute to knowledge of the Superfund in Los Angeles? And over again, that would be the line of questioning by the other side. In the last few years, that never comes up. Everybody has historians as experts on their cases. So in some ways, there's been a little bit of winning going on, and I do kind of see that those unnecessary barriers between one time of history and another, some have fallen aside a bit, and I think that's all for the good.
I think some of the biggest changes in the field of public history in the last 40 years, not that I've been doing it for 40 years, are some of the things we've pointed to today. Greater attention to issues such as archival silences for those who work, or museum silences for those who are working in those areas. Making sure that what is presented to the public or what is made available to the public or what is collected for future research is more inclusive. So I think that's a big change. The notion, greater accessibility has become a part of public history, a big part of the dialogue, particularly in museum exhibits, anything going online, et cetera. Shared authority, I think, is a concept that has taken hold over the last few decades and is a central part of how any scholarship is done in that field. The notion of not just telling a community story, but letting the community, finding a way to facilitate the community's telling of the story. And so I think, in my mind, when I read through the literature, I see those as some of the most important changes.
Yeah, I'll add, I just want to add a couple things. Like, I think, so you're talking about how there's seems to be like a broader range of stories told, like the kinds of stories that are told. And I think also there's been a shift in how they're told, right? And so that's part of the digital turn. And so for example, like again, CMALS is right in front of me. So Latino cartographies, okay? So that fulfills both of these shifts that I'm talking about, right? It's expanding the stories of Houston and the Americas that are told by focusing on people of Latin American descent and Latinx artists, and in the most creative way possible, right? Like this interactive digital board. And so I think both of these changes are happening together, right? Like the kinds of stories that are told is expanding as well as the way they're told.
I think something else that I've seen is that, especially since 2020, I think that there is a real desire to sort of see public history as a way to advocate for not just accessibility, but for social justice. And I know a lot of the newer kind of public history work that I've seen coming out really has that as kind of its driving force, right? I know that kind of looking back over the scholarship over the years, there was a way to be a public historian, but you have to be very, even, and you need to, sort of remove yourself from the research, and I think that there's a push towards that in the historical discipline, but also in terms of public history, right? Public history becomes a way for more people to be involved in telling those stories, and also to use the stories that they are telling to advocate for change. So I think that that's something that is really exciting, and with a lot of the work that has been coming out.
Thank you, everyone, for such thoughtful comments. I think it's now time for us to open this up for questions from the audience. Wes, are you around, or am I going to run the microphone? Or Daniel, do you have the okay, Daniel, you've got the microphone. So if you have a question for our amazing panelists, Daniel will bring you the microphone, and you can ask it, and we can hear it.
Hi, my name is Christine Womack, and thank you, Marty, you made my day mentioning my name earlier. I started working in the Center for Public History in 1988, and I retired in '07. And the one humanitarian item I want to talk to about Marty is that that you never hollered at me or screamed at me. I would have probably cried. But I know when I retired, I think it was within 2 years, you called me and you said, Christine, I looked up my name in this national encyclopedia, and it says, do you remember? Yes. It says, Martin V. Melosi, Director, Christine Womack, Center for Public History. Oh, gosh, I'm so glad you called me. You probably would have been staring down at me. But we talked about it, and we both realized, I think, what happened. You had asked me to reply to them when they asked for the verification of your maybe name and title. And so I put your name and I put your title, and at the bottom, at the end of the letter, I put Christine Womack, Institute for Public History, University of Houston, and they put that together. So I will be internally.
You should be up here, that's fine.
What?
Do you have a couple $1 million? Did you want to name the center?
Well, no, you know what? Absolutely. If I save enough money and or win the lottery, I will make that a fruition and true. But the only other thing, I know you briefly mentioned the Tenneco lecture series, and I know this is public history, and to talk about that. But Marty, you were such an integral part. That was such an interesting thing. The Tenneco Corporation was here, and they gave you and the Center for Public History a yearly grant, and you used it to fruition. I mean, we had phenomenal speakers, 1 or 2 big names every year. And then after that, when word got out, different departments, I think not only within our college, but others contacted you, and they asked you to help with the funding, co-sponsor or sponsor, and you had to read all that, and we let them know, and they were very happy when they received money to help them. So. And I won't be here maybe in 10 years, certainly not in 100.
I'd like to see the person. Okay. 100 years.
Thank you. This has been most engaging, and the talk of accessibility to the stories and telling the stories, and interesting that at least 2 of you are from Tennessee and from Memphis. I'm from the Arab American community, and Danny Thomas, the founder of St. Jude Children's Research Hospital in Memphis, was a great storyteller. And our community in the United States has reached a time when it's time to establish archives. There is an Arab American National Museum in Dearborn, which is Metro Detroit, which is a Smithsonian affiliate and a real crown jewel in the Smithsonian family. We're discovering that there is a large and long history of Arab Americans in Texas. And there's a kind of, and pardon me for being so long, I just got this talent up here, and I need your professional observations. Where and how would be the best way to establish an archive in our state, ideally in our city, to collect and house these artifacts and stories? Okay? I'm all ears.
I'm seeing Christian Kelleher, who is the in charge of special collections here at U of H Libraries.
That gentleman?
Yes, who's waving.
Talk to him.
Are you my newest best friend?
Yeah, talk to him. You got the people there right there.
He's the guy.
He's,
He's
I
the
think
guy.
he'd be a great person to connect with.
That's right.
Over there.
There's like a shill in the audience, wasn't it?
Hi, everybody. I know that you had talked about, missed opportunities in the past and opportunities for the future, but I was curious if you could, and some of you touched on it, if you could expand on the challenges that you see for public history programs going forward. What are some of the things that, programs in universities, other institutions need to be aware of and potentially overcome?
Money. But, and in all seriousness, it's how you go about trying to underwrite what you're doing. And this is, I think, any of us that have been in this position understand not only the difficulty, but also what kind of strategies make sense in the long run. And in my case, I always felt that endowments were the best available way to do that, because they are insulated from the current administrations in that respect, and they give you a certain degree of economic autonomy. But they're also among the most difficult to acquire. And I do think that it's frustrating because without the resources, it's very difficult to get sufficient personnel. Now, Debbie's done a really good job in enlisting students. I think that model has been very, very effective. But there are many cases where, and Monica and I have talked about this before, where you're anxious to help. In some cases, there are projects you'd like to do, and if they're not going to, you're able to get funding for them, but you don't have the personnel to carry it out. And so, unfortunately, it's very crass. It really kind of comes down to money. And the problem is, in most cases, when you're busy trying to operate an institution on a daily basis, the time spent on development is erratic at best. I've been involved in other institutions too, with historical research groups on their board of directors, and it's kind of the same, is that people are worried about billable hours, and they really can't spend time doing it. So there are basic kind of pragmatic issues that are kind of fundamental. My daughter, my oldest daughter, is a jewelry designer, has her own business, has had it for years. And when she first got into doing this, I said, Gina, you need to take some business classes. She's a born artist. She laughed at me. Now, many years later, she said, Dad, boy, were you right. And so I hate to be so simple about it, but it really does come down to developing strategies that allow you to do the things that you want to do. I think there's there's plenty of things to do, plenty of worthy things to do. And I think the panel and the things that they've done, and I wonder somehow how they ever got done, because all these limitations make it extremely difficult. So I really think that that's the kind of fundamental question that you have to address in a persistent manner.
You go ahead, I'll go after you.
Sure. Yeah, one thing I want to add is that I think there's a challenge in messaging amongst two students, I mean. Now, look, we're in this room, and I feel like we're probably preaching to the choir that history matters. Like, I think everyone in this room wouldn't be here if they didn't agree that history matters. I was supposed to teach an undergraduate class that would have been a public history course that didn't make. So enrollments are an issue. So if there's this national trend of declining enrollments, then that plays out in public history. So in terms of carrying out projects and then like preparing students too for careers. And earlier, one of our former students said how her students straight up told her, oh, I didn't study so much, something like, I didn't study so much for this exam because I was busy studying for like my real classes, right? And so I think part of the challenge is to how we're messaging to the students why history matters. And, you know, I feel like it's certainly ripe for messaging. Like I remember when I was an undergrad, my assumption was, and it worked out because I wanted to go into academia, but like my assumption was that if you were going to get a history degree, you were either going to teach K through 12 or higher ed, or you were going to go to law school. And public history shows that there's so many things you can do with a history degree, but that message isn't landing at this moment. So I think the question is, how do we make it land?
If you're talking about public history programs within the university, I wonder if one of the problems with messaging is also what I see as a challenge dealing with greater recognition from our colleagues about what we do. There is a persistent resistance to appropriately acknowledging public history work in merit and promotion. Merit and promotion. Merit being the so-called raises we get annually for whatever we've done, and promotion being for, well, we know what promotion is. I think that is quite a problem. And I find the resistance to, first of all, I find it amazing, the current computer faculty reporting system we use asks on every activity about whether there's a community component. We are required to say yes or no. And yet doing something with the community is not valued. I think this resistance, to be blunt, is grounded in fear. I think colleagues who don't deal with the community and are not sure how to do it are afraid they're going to be left behind. But what I am not suggesting is not that we replace the traditional means of merit and promotion, but that we expand them. But too often the work we do in public history is relegated to service. And by the way, when you come up for promotion or you're up for merit, service is barely counted. So I think if we're going to really see public history grow within the universities, our colleagues have to give us greater recognition for what we do.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with what you're saying, Kath. I was having this conversation with Denise, before the panel, and I think that it is also, you see more and more the push for universities, especially public universities, to have that engagement in that, and people are selling that. That's we're ringing those bells at the highest levels. But what does that mean, and what does that look like? And are we creating structures internally to be able to facilitate that, right? They say, we want you to collaborate, we want you to engage with the community, but we're going to make the system so, we're not going to change the very narrow lanes that we have to facilitate that kind of ability to do that in a very honest way. And I think about the entrepreneurial nature of, Marty and Joe when they started CPH, and you kind of come to creative solutions, right? And I think about, when we were team teaching, I was sharing this example earlier, in the Gulf Coast Food Project, right? There was no structure in place at the university for team teaching across departments, let alone schools, right? So we ended up, I taught an oral history class, and a colleague taught a documentary film class, and we decided we were going to meet in the same room. And we just didn't ask for permission, right? we created the syllabus together, and we met in the same room, and the students worked on projects together. And the interesting thing is that the product of those classes is great. It looks great. It looks wonderful in newsletters, and let's showcase the work that we're doing, but yet the infrastructure is not in place to be able to make that happen. And I think that it's not just our colleagues kind of recognizing what we do as work and as valuable, but also how the institution and the university sees that as well, and how they facilitate it, how they encourage it, not just in word, but in deed.
So So I'm going to give Mark or Debbie an opportunity to jump in here. The history department, Monica and Marty and Kathy, you wouldn't know this because you're not here anymore, but we did make some important and large steps forward in the spring with regard to how public history and digital humanities are treated in the annual faculty evaluation process. And Mark, you led one of the working groups on that, so I don't know if you want to say a little bit more
Just,
about
is there any
that.
retroactive merit money?
There is no retroactive merit.
Take that up with Kathy Patterson. She's the department chair now.
The one thing I do want to actually just so this is a good thing, right? Like this is a response to the problem that that Kathy and Monica were talking about. One thing that was also an important change was not only public history and digital humanities, but also co-authored work and collaborative, like collaboration, as we've heard in both panels, is such a key component of public history. And so it's important to recognize like the different ways in which people do history and make scholarship. So.
Anyone who doesn't think collaborative work is hard work and equal, I'd like to invite you to come and, take a semester with us at the magazine and try editing one from Word document to finished product. And I think you'll find it's pretty time consuming.
This is a wonderful product. Excuse me for my outburst. This is a wonderful magazine.
Yes,
Thank
it is.
you.
Yeah, it is.
That's all Debbie. That's all Debbie.
So I really love hearing that universities, as someone who's going on the job market, I really love that public history is moving in this formatting of like accepting the work that we do and the labor we do. However, I am wondering if any of you are envisioning public history dissertations and how that might be something for the future that might be considered.
Well, we did that informally, as there'd been a lot of talk about having a PhD in public history. I was not one of the people that were really thrilled about that idea, but some people did. But in a de facto way, we did that. So if we had students that were interested in a topic that might fit that category, we didn't discourage it. And there were some cases where they were completed. So the lines are blurred sometimes, and so I think it was worth it for us not to even think about what those lines were. I'm not sure that if we try to formalize it in some way, it would have been worse. People would have put a magnifying glass to it, or in some respects. But there are some places that do that already around the country. It's not an exotic idea. So I think in several cases, if a student can sell the idea, then that might be possible to do it. Not all places are so originally designed with their programs, so I don't think it's something that hasn't happened. Certainly, we've had that experience here.
And a number of dissertation topics actually emerged from the projects the students worked on, which was really terrific.
Yeah, with those, I think also considering what might be additional components to a traditional 350, 400-page dissertation that's all text, but how can we explore ways of if there's an archive that's created, if there's a digital component, and I think that I'm not sure where I don't know where this department is, or any, departments in terms of thinking about how that might look, but I know that, some of the dissertations and folks that I've worked with have incorporated those elements. So, but I think that as we're thinking about expanding the notion of what is scholarship for the purpose of tenure and promotion and merit, we should also be thinking about the output that's happening and the work that goes into it, right? Creating an oral history archive is a lot of work, right? Creating, some kind of interactive database, right? I'll be really interested to see in the next, several years, like with, digital humanities, and as that grows, how we start to think about those things. I don't think it's out of the realm of possible. I just don't know when.
Larry, did you say? Yeah. Okay, so I have a quick question. I've worked on a few digital humanities projects, but I've never worked on them from the beginning. So how do you get communities to come to you if you're not the one who started the interest in the project?
Do you mean how do we get community to come to us for a project? Well, word of mouth, that's part of it. For example, that's how we got the San Jose Clinic project.
Yeah.
They came to Monica. And then we actually have another project that's going to be coming down the road soon that is coming to us because of someone who saw what we did for San Jose Clinic. So frequently it's word of mouth. And I want to, this is sort of a little off topic, but a little bit on topic. We've talked a lot about money and about community, and I want to recognize one of our community partners who's here, the Harris County Historical Society, who's represented more or less by Charles Fitch, who's here today. They just celebrated their 100th anniversary in 2023. So their organization formed 101 years ago. And to celebrate their centennial, they established an endowed scholarship for public history work here at the University of Houston. It is the only endowed scholarship that we have for public history work that is available to undergraduates. Last year was the first year that it was awarded, and there were 2 students who received those scholarships, and one of those students is here today, and that's Emily Harris. She's over there for the work, recognized for the work that she did on Houston music traditions. The other one isn't here today because she's teaching English in Spain. And then last night, they awarded the second of the scholarships, so it's been a year, hard to believe. And that one went to a student named Ryan Banda, who is in communications, but she did a public history project with Vince Lee, who's also here. And it was an exhibit on Marvin Zindler's Angels. So any of you who've been in Houston a long time, you know who Marvin Zindler is. So we're really pleased and grateful to have that kind of support from our community members.
The research in public history class, at least when I was involved with it, we did projects in the community, and they were, we put a price tag on them, usually did them for free. And sometimes those turned around and became projects, and they would come back to us. So there has to be some kind of form of advertising. That was one way of doing it. The other way I got money is I got a potential donor drunk, and he gave me $15,000, and that was great. That works once in a while, but
We're going to edit that from the film.
I didn't say who it was.
Yeah, I think, somebody on the earlier panel mentioned public relations, and it's really important to do it. I think and I'm teaching public history the way I stole from Marty. But now up in Oklahoma, to get this, you just have to start reaching out. You just have to start talking to people. And one phone call leads to 3 other phone calls. And it may take 20 phone calls to get to the people you need to get to. But it just is making that effort. And somebody said about building up your contacts, keeping those lists. You have to pay attention to who is in your community. and serve their needs. And it might be leading to civic organizations, fraternal organizations. Churches are very important to reach out to if you want to talk to community members. So you probably want to have some type of material pre-prepared that you can give them, but it's really it's just the effort of reaching out and reaching out and reaching out.
Yeah, I would just add that I think, even like we're kind of talking about from, the level of teaching a course or, a center and how, those projects sort of come, available. But I think that there's also a sensibility among folks who are interested in doing public humanities work to just be out in the community, right? To go to things out of genuine interest and to make those connections, because you never know what might emerge from that, right? I know, talking with folks who have, just happened to, you attend this talk or you attend this event and you get to know people and they get to know you and what you do. And then I think that's really, truly the beautiful kind of grassroots element of the kind of work that we do, right? As opposed to, being more, and I'm kind of introverted. I don't necessarily be comfortable walking up to people, but I think that, that having that sense of curiosity and that sense of genuine interest, I think is a great place to begin, to lay the foundation for this kind of work.
And that's a perfect moment to stop and say thank you to our marvelous panelists. This was a very stimulating conversation, and thank you also to our outstanding audience. You guys had great questions for us, and I think we could keep going. But that conversation can continue informally in a reception after I do the closing remarks. And if you were here before, this is going to sound familiar. And if you weren't, then, and Monica can maybe hold up in just a minute for the show and tell here in a second. At CPH and Houston History Magazine, we rely on the generous support of people like you who are equally committed to keeping Houston's history alive and supporting our mission of helping students learn valuable skills. If you've liked what you've heard this afternoon, please consider subscribing to the Houston History Magazine or making a charitable contribution to CPH to support student success. To learn more, scan the QR code on the back of your program or talk to Hannah Barker or me. We would both love to have that conversation. You can also find us on social media. We're on X, we're on Facebook, we're on Insta. If you want the tags, see me. I flunked reading them before, so I'm not going to try that again. It took a lot of people to make today's event happen. Thank you to our panelists, without whom truly we would not be here today. A huge thanks to Dr. Wes Jackson and Daniel Killian in the CPH. All the wonderful folks in UH Streaming Media. Renee Alfaro for his help with the audio-visual setup, Sylvia Molina and the Hilton staff for taking care of our hosting and catering needs, the CPH lecture series for funding, Dr. Kathy Patterson, chair of the history department, and Dean Daniel P. O'Connor of the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences. Next, we will have a short reception, and I've been promised that there are both hors d'oeuvres and wine at this reception because it is going to be after 5 o'clock when we get out there. Please continue the conversation in the reception and consider staying for our 5:30 keynote address with Dr. Denise Marangolo. And finally, please mark your calendars for Dr. Mary Ellen Curtin's book talk on Thursday, November 7th. Dr. Curtin will be discussing her new biography of Barbara Jordan 2 days after the election. So maybe she can be talking about Jordan's legacy for the first African-American woman president of the United States. That would be an ambition. So